welcome to World Insight, coming to you live from Beijing on CCTV News. I'm your host, Tian Wei. On today's show, crunching the numbers as Obama unveils his final budget. We look at U.S. spending priorities and how they might impact the global economy. And fizzling out, this Chinese New Year saw far fewer fireworks lighting up the skies. Are they worth sacrificing for a cleaner environment? And we start today's show with the final budget coming from the Obama administration. As the U.S. president, he is in the office. Mr. Obama plans to hike taxes on oil and cut the deficit by $2.9 trillion over 10 years. Many believe the ambitious plan is going to be rejected by the Republican-controlled Congress, but his spending priorities send signals of optimism about the future of the U.S. economy, some say.
An ambitious proposal. Obama's spending plan for 2017 clocks in at $4.1 trillion as the outgoing president seeks to make a mark in education, criminal justice reform, and job creation. But one item that's sure to ruffle feathers in the Republican-controlled Congress is a hike in oil prices. Obama plans to tax oil at just over $10 a barrel over the next 10 years. The White House says the tax hike aims to create a clear incentive for private sector innovation to reduce America's reliance on oil and invest in clean energy technologies. The proposed budget envisions a deficit of $503 billion in the 2017 fiscal year, after a $616 billion budget cap in the current fiscal year, which ends on September 30th. In the decade ahead, they hope to close the deficit by $2.9 trillion. The budget proposal from the president is largely a political document. Congress can advance elements of the budget without endorsing the entire proposal. And the U.S. economy faces challenges in the coming year. On Wednesday, Federal Reserve Chair Janet Yellen expressed her concerns.
And against the backdrop of persistent weakness abroad, exacerbated concerns about the outlook for global growth. These growth concerns, along with strong supply conditions and high inventories, contributed to the recent fall in the prices of oil and other commodities. In turn, low commodity prices could trigger financial stresses in commodity exporting economies, particularly in vulnerable emerging market economies and for commodity producing firms in many countries. Should any of these downside risks materialize, foreign activity and demand for U.S. exports could weaken and financial market conditions could tighten further.
Nevertheless, Yellen remains confident U.S. economic activity will expand at a moderate pace in the coming years, and that labor market indicators will continue to strengthen. Back in December, the Federal Reserve raised interest rates for the first time since the financial crisis, ending a 7-year run near zero. Challenges ahead make further hikes uncertain, and Obama's budget is unlikely to emerge from Congress unscathed. Still, the country's top policymakers have sent some clear signals on their future plans for the national economy.
And joining us on this discussion about the U.S. national budget and its impact possibly on economies elsewhere, we are having Mr. Douglas Paul, Vice President of Carnegie Endowment for International Peace from Washington, D.C. Welcome to our program. Also in the U.S., we're having Professor Max Wolf, Professor of Economics at the New School University in New York City. Meanwhile, in London, we are joined by Mr. John Ross, Senior Fellow at Chongyang Institute for Financial Studies at Renmin University of China. Welcome to our program, gentlemen, the three of you. Happy Chinese New Year as well. Well, we are facing New Year and therefore new budget, $4.1 trillion for the fiscal year 2017. And yet many say a lot of internal fights within the Congress. Mr. Paul, how much future does this plan have in Congress?
It has virtually no future as a plan as a whole. Some elements of it may be taken up, especially as you did in your setup piece, you talked about law enforcement reform. That may be taken up because there's some broader support for it. But from the defense budget on through the social spending, especially the notional tax on barrels of oil, all of these would be highly controversial and unlikely to materialize in law.
Let me go to you, Professor Wolf. Probably you can help us to understand better about the economics behind this. More than 500 billion US dollars of deficit for the fiscal year 2017. Of course, it's lower than many years ago, but still higher than the promised number. Secondly, heavier taxes on oil industry and the rich. These two, of course, are thorny issues between the two parties. What do you think about the future of this budget?
Yeah, so I think the budget is valuable in the sense that it can have a big influence on setting the debate, the parameters of the debate, and putting some things and make front and center so they have to be debated, and taking other things and pushing them into the shadows. So rhetorically, ideologically, the budget is somewhat important, but as a policy document, I would have to agree it has very limited prospects for being the actual law of the land. I mean, the joke in Washington for many years has been the president and Congress can't agree on what time it is, so they almost certainly can't agree on how to spend $11 billion a day, right? Additionally, this is a presidential year. So all years are not presidential years, but in presidential years, the bickering is even more sort of intense, and everyone wants to score points with their own base by attacking the other party and the other party's suggestions. So I'd have to agree that the sort of roadmap is limited. The budget deficits are a huge structural problem, but I think part of what we've seen here is that we've been limping along globally in the U.S. with heavy stimulus from central banks. The era of central banks propping up the global economy looks to be over. You can see that has not been met with much celebration economically, certainly not in the equity markets. And so I do think we need the fiscal policy to step up in the U.S., or we're going to have a weaker economy, and this budget does fire a shot across that bow.
Well, a lot of shots, I guess. For example, whether these policies, including some of the mandatory spending on social security issues likely to be realized, it's also, once again, Mr. Paul, a very political issue inside your country. What do you make of that, particularly given what Professor Wolf mentioned earlier already? This is a presidential election campaign season, and everything being said by the administration is likely to be taken advantage of, if not manipulated, by all the candidates. So what do you think about all of these elements within the budget so far?
Well, as Professor Wolf just said, this is kind of a political roadmap to give people something to talk about. And you've got from President Obama the liberal or progressive agenda, and you'll be hearing from Congress in various less focused ways, diverse views about how they oppose most of the proposals in his progressive scheme. This is going to be a very difficult year for anything to pass the Congress, because Congress will not be in session very much. Most of the members will be out campaigning most of the year. So even things like the Trans-Pacific Partnership legislation looks like it won't get attended to until after the election.
Yes, indeed. We need to invite really someone from outside the United States. Probably they have a different perspective. Mr. Ross, what do you think of this budget, especially a very long quote we used in the background from Janet Yellen? Of course, you know, her words is almost incomprehensible for anyone who's not an economist. But what she's trying to say is that U.S., Mr. Ross, is not going to go back to so-called the preset plan to make sure that the economy is going as it has planned, because it is not. So, Mr. Ross, what kind of message did they send to the rest of the world, for example, in the European countries?
Well, I think that the budget itself is not really going to make much difference. The two really big things which are happening at the present time is the big currency movements, popularly known as currency wars. But actually, big attempt by the European Central Bank and by the Japanese Central Bank to lower their currencies. This put considerable pressure on the US, and is one of the things for the US economy slowing down. It's on year, it's slowed from about 2.9% in the first quarter 2015 to 1.8% in this quarter. Now, as the economy slowed, the bets are off, because people don't think that the Fed's going to raise the interest rates in the way that it did. I didn't think it was going to anyway, but therefore the result, which is the dollar is falling, and that's what's causing mayhem in Japan at the present time, because Abenomics' only real idea was to devalue the yen, and that's just taken a big hit. These are much bigger factors than what happens with this goings on with the internal US budget.
even though Ms. Yellen's words tend to be dry, which is her job, she has to talk in a very academic, acceptable way. Professor Wolf, what kind of message do you think she is spreading around the world? We understand the oil prices is going down, the stock markets did not react very well, and also there has been some negative comments coming from outside the United States about where the U.S. economy is going. What kind of impact do you think it is setting?
So I actually think that Chairman Yellen is doing the best she can with a very difficult situation. The truth is that the same market participants who are screaming bloody murder and blaming the Fed for the downdraft in asset prices were screaming bloody murder about a mysterious inflation that they had inaccurately forecast to be right around the corner for 6 years. And so the truth is the Federal Reserve is supposed to not listen to popular demands. That's why we have an independent central bank. And they're supposed to be setting themselves up to be able to do the two things that their basic charter requires them to do, which is maintain price stability, fight inflation, and much more pressingly right now, deflation, and also try to maximize employment in the U.S. This has been very difficult. And the Federal Reserve is supposed to work with the fiscal policy authorities in Washington who have literally been absent from their jobs for 5 years. And so the situation is quite perilous. I do think we're going to see less rate increases coming forward, but I think the Federal Reserve raised rates only so they could cut them, not because the macroeconomy needed them raised. And that was a very difficult situation.
Mr. Paul, given what your colleague already said from New York, what would that mean for the eventual budget, at least the discussion of the budget? Here in this part of the world, we're extremely interested in the defense spending of the United States. This time, for fiscal year 2017, so far, $582.7 billion US dollars, a bit higher than 2016. Is it likely to be realized?
Well, there will be creep across the board. We'll have continuing resolutions to maintain spending levels with normal growth in outlays in the programs that are not readily controlled. And you mentioned earlier Social Security as a big one. As the baby boomers retire, more and more of a burden will be carried by the federal budget, which is not always accurately projected in these budget forecasts. The outlook is for defense spending to, as you say, almost $590 billion in the formal defense budget. And there's probably another $500 billion in other departmental budgets that are costs that are related to defense. Within the defense budget, there's an attempt to reduce the amount spent on the Navy and increase the amount spent on the Air Force over a longer-term 5-year plan. And I think that is something that will be noticeable in the region, because the U.S. will not be able to, and has decided not to build a number of ships that were intended to be deployed to the Pacific in the years going forward.
But Mr. Paul, you know this better than I do, that in this part of the world we're extremely interested. If the taxes are not likely to be raised as a result of political battles, if there's more spending on the social security issues and monetary issues, is the spending for the defense likely to be realized? That's what we're particularly interested in. How it's likely to be divided? Is it going to be for the fight against Islamic states? Or is it going to be for what the U.S. term as so-called rebalancing in Asia, which is going to have a big impact in this part of the world? Mr. Paul.
Well, if you had a chance to follow the statements of the responsible officers in the Defense Department recently to Congress, they've talked about the rising threat from Russia and and to some extent also from China, and those are in terms of big programs. I think that the upward pressure on the budget is much greater than any downward pressure, and the political debate in this country is going to be for more defense. Ever since August 2013, when America's drift toward isolationism, which was never a strong drift, was reversed by the execution of American hostages by ISIS in Iraq, the public has had a higher tolerance for spending on the Al-Qaeda and ISIS conflicts. And I think we're going to see more of that as time progresses.
Yes, indeed. We also see in the general election campaign season that people are more interested even in the security issue and also the international relations issue, even more than the U.S. economy. Well, they are doing that, but from outside the U.S., we are extremely interested in where the U.S. economy is going, Mr. Ross, because that's going to have a big impact on our economies. U.S. In the speeches and also in the testimony of Ms. Yellen, she accused the Central Bank of Japan, Central Bank of Europe, and also China of not necessarily doing positive things to encourage the world economy growing. What do you make of it?
Well, I think firstly, just coming back to the budget question, President Obama's big plan has been to keep the US out of a big war. And it's not really, the defense spending is not separate from the foreign policy which is pursued by the United States. He shifted about 1% of GDP from defense spending into investment, and that accounts for the recovery of the US economy. He's kept trying to carry out this rebalance into Asia, but too many things keep getting in the way. Firstly, the wars in the Middle East, which have a big effect on the population of the United States. That's why they're very agitated by the question of ISIS, as is the population of Europe. Secondly, also the situation which exists with Russia, and I think all this makes it very difficult in practice to carry out a very big rebalancing, as it's put, to the situation in the Pacific. So really he faces some foreign policy choices, and they're not really separable from the defense budget and economic choices.
And therefore, Mr. Ross, because the European Central Bank and also European capitals as a whole have been spending so much energy and capital on the immigration problems that you are having right now as a result of the Syrian crisis, what are the expectations coming from the European countries for Washington? Is the accusation coming from Washington correct from your perspective?
No, I think that the policy that was pursued by the United States has created a big problem. I think that their confrontation with Russia in the Ukraine, which was entirely avoidable, has created a lot of problems in Europe, including for Germany, and it's undoubtedly the invasion of Iraq which started the whole mess in the Middle East. So I think US policy has created all sorts of problems. The new element of the situation is the European Central Bank thought it had a way out, which was a big devaluation of the euro. And as long as the US economy was recovering strongly and US interest rates were going to, therefore believed going to go up, that was viable. Now that people believe that the that the US interest rates will not go up so much, the euro has been going up again, and this is slowing down the eurozone. We already saw that the figures which came out today for the euro economy, which are just only slightly over 1% annualized growth, are very weak. So the European economy is really rather stagnant, and I don't think US foreign policy has been very helpful in regard to this.
Professor Wolf, I know you're an economist, but you probably want to respond to this on the US role politically, and as a result, what role should the US play in terms of the economics of the world?
Look, I think clearly our global role would be improved by putting our economic house in better order and probably toning down some of the more bellicose language and some of the more threatening language that we've historically used around the world. So I think that's pretty clear. On the other hand, I don't think we should expect such events to unfold in an election year. I would point out in terms of the military and foreign policy footing that the leading Democratic candidate in Hillary Clinton and all of the Republican candidates are running on a stronger, more militarized U.S. presence around the world, and that therefore the likely winner would probably be someone who campaigned on that. In terms of the global central bank coordination, I think there tends to be a major issue here that folks forget, and that is part of the reason we don't see competitive devaluations around the world is because if you lower the value of your currency while you gain some export and job advantage, you usually pay a lot more for commodities, particularly energy. And part of what's happened in the last year is we have a global deflationary pressure, and all those fears about rising prices of commodities and energy are gone because energy and commodity prices are tanking. And that has freed central banks under domestic fiscal policy pressures sometimes to be more aggressive with their competitive devaluation valuations, and that's put us on a tough footing in terms of our ability to coordinate the money center global leading central banks. If there's any turmoil in the economy, which the markets are telling us is here, we will sorely want that coordination, and this is not a good way to approach it.
Mr. Paul, is it the most important thing to streamline the U.S. economy, put the house in order, as Professor Wolf said, first, or to streamline your international relations policies so that there will not be too much trouble being created around the world, many would ask?
Well, you're asking an impossible question. The priorities on foreign policy are as just characterized. Everybody's trying to show he's got a hairier chest than the other guy, and tougher on the foreigners, and it's not looking very rational from the ordinary man in the streets point of view. There are possibilities. I mean, if we could had some more trust between the two parties, putting $10 a barrel tax on oil and then taking all that money and putting it into infrastructure would stimulate the economy, be a fiscal boost. It would provide growth both at home and have an impact elsewhere abroad. But nobody in the Republican Party trusts giving the liberal Obama government any more money, because they'll spend it on something else and it'll be frittered away, not built into the infrastructure. So you end up with an impasse on how to take the fiscal picture forward.
Finally, we go to Mr. Ross. You've been living in China for a long time, doing research about Chinese economies. The accusations coming from Mr. Yellen about China's exchange rate and many other things, to you, is that pragmatic in terms of turning the world economy around?
I think it's a total diversion. One of the things which comes over most clearly at the present time is there was various noises about China was slowing down. Well, the actual year-on-year figures show that the US economy slowed down last year from between the first and last quarters from 2.9% to 1.8%. China's economy slowed down from 7% to 6.8%. So whether you measure it either in percentage slowdown or absolute slowdown, the US economy slowed down a lot more than the Chinese economy did. And the big impact which you're seeing, I mean, it's mayhem in financial markets at the present time, the stock markets, is due to the interest rate moves in the US, nothing to do with China. The real big gorilla in the world economy at the present time is the US slowdown, not the Chinese slowdown, which is really rather marginal. And China and India in particular continuing to grow very fast.
Very interesting discussion, I guess. We started from the U.S. budget, but eventually we are discussing the real essence of the world economy, including that of U.S., China, and Europe. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for being with us. Douglas Paul, Max Wolf, and John Ross. Really appreciate it. Thank you. Stay with us here on World Insight. We've got more to come, including fizzling out. This Chinese New Year saw far fewer fireworks lighting up the skies. Are they worth sacrificing for a cleaner environment? Welcome back. Fireworks and firecrackers have long been seen as an essential element of Chinese New Year celebrations, but now these explosive displays are increasingly under fire as they are blamed for the air pollution in China's big cities. Some say it's just not the same without fireworks, while others feel they are a sacrifice worth making in the name of a cleaner environment. So with traditions clash with modern values, will the celebrations be a lot quieter in the years to come? We'll be discussing that with our panel in just a moment, but first, take a look at this.
It's a tradition going back centuries. Fireworks are said to bring luck in the year ahead, but their own days may be numbered. The government is intent on clamping down on the tradition, all in the name of safety and air quality. Official figures show 138 cities banned fireworks this year, while another 536 put limits on the times and places fireworks can be used. Shanghai, while allowing the displays, tightened things up further by requiring purchasers of fireworks to register their names and addresses. It's a devastating impact to the industry. Back in 2010, there were more than 2,400 outlets in the capital. That number has plummeted, with only 700 left in business this year, a drop of more than 70% in just 6 years. The sales period is also now limited to only 10 days. The market has scrambled to provide more environmentally friendly fireworks with less heavy metals, but the higher cost has only hurt sales more.
This year's stock volume is about 180,000 cases, the lowest in recent years. Instead of promoting sales of big products that are worth thousands of yuan, we have decided to prioritize small and medium-sized products that are a lot cheaper.
Smoke from fireworks is said to dramatically worsen air quality, and the smell of gunpowder can linger throughout the extended holiday. Smoke levels tend to jump on Chinese New Year's Eve, when people traditionally set off the largest number of fireworks. Air monitoring data shows that Beijing's PM 2.5 particulate pollution, considered the most harmful to human health, surged 15-fold in 6 hours this New Year's Eve. But it's worth noting that that's the worst in 4 years, despite the massive decrease in the number of fireworks. At least 128 other Chinese cities also experienced severe air pollution during the first hour after the Chinese New Year countdown in 2014. Nevertheless, many people said they would hate to see the ritual come to an end.
It's an old tradition, and we have been waiting for this for an entire year. We can only set off fireworks for a few days.
For many, it appears to be a choice between preserving a popular tradition or sacrificing it in the name of cleaner air. Whether a balance can be struck is still an open question. But for now, the ancient practice, going back hundreds of years, may soon be history.
For more on this debate about fireworks or not during the traditional Chinese New Year, we are joined here by Professor Qi Ye from the School of Public Policy and Management at Tsinghua University. He himself is an environmentalist from China. Also, we are joined by Professor Teng Jimeng, who is from the American Studies Center at Beijing Foreign Studies University, of course, an expert on cultures and traditions. Welcome to both of you, gentlemen.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Yes, indeed. So, what about the fireworks? Are you hearing a lot fireworks where you were? You went back to your hometown in the Hebei province.
A lot less than I anticipated. And I went back to my hometown and anticipated firework, but before the midnight and the after, really not that much this year. There's big change.
Big change. Professor Teng, what about you?
Well, it's just the opposite is happening in my hometown and in a place where I live.
Where are you?
I'm actually outside the fifth ring, and right now it was exploding.
In Beijing, you mean?
In Beijing, I mean, exploding out there with the spluttering fireworks being kind of burned to celebrate the New Year. I was so surprised.
Mixed messages, I guess, from both of you. It's very hard to judge whether people are setting off more or less, but one number is very clear. I got this on hand. 139 cities having heavy air pollution during the Spring Festival. Among them, 47 cities severe pollution, including Beijing and Tianjin. The pollution we're talking about mainly are PM 2.5, which is a way these days to measure China's air quality. Professor Qi, what's going on?
Well, the fireworks certainly is a major contributor for a short period of time. For this loading is a impulse, is a very strong impulse. Then it may not last as long as the normal PM 2.5 pollution as we saw before, but really it can get really high peak of pollution. And it is severe, and it's something of concern. Right.
Professor Teng, though, can we sacrifice setting off fireworks and firecrackers, which is, according to Chinese tradition, scaring off the evil spirits and also bringing in a lot of warm atmosphere for the Spring Festival? Can we sacrifice them for a cleaner sky, at least for some day?
I think it's very hard. To me, it's a very, very hard choice. I think it's a kind of a difficult dilemma, which is acutely felt by the people in this country and in my community, for example. I mean, these people are farmers who used to live on the spot of their land and celebrate the New Year. I mean, all basically their lives. I mean, it was a tradition passed down from their elders, I mean, down to their children, their grandchildren. So it's very hard to ban a tradition or legislate against a tradition.
Remember, it was back in the year 2004 that after 10 years of banning fireworks and firecrackers, the ban was lifted because people were saying this is a tradition that we have to keep, because this is something it is about our culture. And because China is the country that invented gunpowder to begin with anyway. So that's why we started again, or restarted with very strong call from the society. And now the society is going in various directions. Some say yes, some say no. Professor Qi, from an environmentalist perspective, and someone who knows Chinese culture very well, what kind of choice should we have?
Well, I think culture is at least as important as environmental quality, right? But at the same time, we watch if the culture itself is changing. I think Professor Teng just made a very good point. You know, in the past, when China was in an agrarian society, and celebration, firework. I mean, this is really fit for that type of society. Now we have moved into a very different society. Now, more than half, more than 55%, the population now living in the cities. We're so much spatially, geographically closer to each other, and whatever you do, you have some impact on others.
It's not just hurting your household, it's really hurting the streets and alleys and probably even on the third ring road.
Exactly. So on the one hand, we do need to carry out the culture, and on the other hand, we do need to balance
but
the different
Professor
amenities.
Tang, is that going to deprive Chinese rights to celebrate with fireworks and firecrackers? I mean, people elsewhere, in Australia, in the United States, in the UK, everyone could do that, and yet where the fireworks and firecrackers started with, originally in ancient times, could not do them anymore. Is that fair?
Well, no, it's not. But then once again, I mean,
we're in such a paradox, isn't it?
If you look at the people in the United States, for example, people in the Chinatown, for example, I mean, they celebrate the New Year by burning fireworks also, but then strictly regulated and supervised by the city fire department. There is a square actually in Chinatown where there's a Confucius statue over there. I mean, the square actually is the main focus of that very community, the Chinese language speaking community, and people all went to that place to celebrate. And so a limited place, a special place, set aside by the municipal government. I mean, I'm not saying blocking
Professor Tang, is that going to, in a way, satisfy the thirst? Because you remember very well, I mean, before, there were fireworks that was as powerful with gunpowder as ghosts also can shooting down a small airplane almost.
It's like a cannon.
Yes, indeed. And you could heard that from miles away. And of course, this year is much fewer of those, you could tell. But still, is that going to change fundamentally?
Well, no, I mean, I don't think so. Even if we reduce the very level of noise, for example, if we reduce the cannon side of it, let's fire smaller ones.
Okay, let me tell you, in Beijing, there is a certain ban of fireworks. It's only allowed during the last day of the last year, Lunar New Year, which is the New Year's Eve, and also the very first 3 days of the New Year. And then it is going to be banned in most of the locations in Beijing. In Shanghai, it's only allowed, in the city center rather, it's not allowed.
No.
And also in many other cities, it's doing the same thing. But then, can we celebrate a quiet Spring Festival? Is that what Spring Festival is about anymore? Professor Tang.
Well,
I'll give you the chance. I'll give the environmentalists the chance. Anyway, but Professor Tong first.
I mean, I would say half the pleasure would be gone, because this tradition is fun-based. It is basically a tradition that we celebrate. It's not about celebrate the tradition quietly, but the celebration of a tradition with loud noise, because we are a nation that speak loudly. I mean, basically, we speak so loud and so happily and merrily, and this is the occasion that we speak.
Okay.
We celebrate.
All right, you got already your airtime. Let me give you more airtime, Professor Qi, as an environmentalist. But, the argument coming from Professor Tang.
Well, actually, I agree with him.
Which part?
No, this part, you can't really ban the tradition. You can't really ban to eliminate a very important part of the culture. What we really need to do, the spectrum, we can persuade, you can advocate, you can suggest, encourage, incentivize people to do less of this, and to really regulate the way the way it's actually changing very much, right? To consider what happened in the past, what
Right.
happened today.
But then it
Really
creates
very-
a lot of divisions among the society, isn't it? Before it is only a debate about whether we should keep the tradition or not. Now this is one more thing, whether it is going to keep a blue sky or not. So if you set off the fireworks and firecrackers in the neighborhood, and if it is going to be a smoggy day just in a few days, your neighbor's going to accuse you, why are you doing that? You are
Exactly.
ruining our sky. But then the one that are saying that were doing the fireworks were saying, I'm trying to keep the tradition. What's wrong with you guys? So
That's right.
this is what we are seeing, very much a divided society only on this topic alone.
That's right. As I said, we are now living together in an urban society. One person's noise is another person's music, right? I mean, really easily to have this very divisive issue, like this. Another perspective to look at this, right? The fireworks is not the only source of pollution, right? We know cars emit a lot of pollutants, and the power plant, the coal-fired power plants, as compared to that, fireworks actually is a minor source of air pollution.
So which side exactly are you on, Professor Qi? I'm confused.
Well, no. I'm not really debating. I'm really to see how we look at this. As a citizen, I probably really come out against this a lot of noise, a lot of fireworks. But as a scholar, I must analyze what is happening and to say what logic really support or against.
And therefore, if the fireworks and firecrackers are not the major source of what a smoggy sky would be in China, should we continue to limit it? Limit the use of it?
It is not a major source in the long run, but for a short period of time, it is a major source.
Can we use others to take place of the fireworks? For example, electronic fireworks. I mean, in Shanghai, for example, if you're going to get wedding, the government would provide you with free fireworks, electronic ones only, so that you got the atmosphere, but yet you're not doing the pollution. But is that likely to be accepted by most of China?
Well, personally, I don't think so. I think, once again, we miss the fun because the noise, because of this very cracking, kind of illuminating images they created in the sky. I mean, no country in the world can do this. Look at the United States, the July 4th celebration, Australia. I mean, every single nation would set aside an occasion to celebrate. But my option, I think, is, I agree with Professor Qi, I mean, as an environmentalist, I think that we need to make other options more appealing and more attractive. For example, like the temple fairs, like the dragon dancing, lion dancing, make these fairs and activities even more attractive. I mean, switch those people who produces and manufacture gunpowders to these other areas so that we can make these temple fairs more attractive.
All right.
I mean, see more lions, see more monkeys in this case.
That's interesting. But eventually, Professor Qi, I have to ask you, this is something we are facing every day, a choice. This not only on this issue, fireworks or not, but also on many other issues, because China is moving very fast. So
That's right.
what is the right balance when we are making the decision? On the one hand, on the other hand, can we always make and keep a balance? Is that possible?
Well, it is possible, but it's hard. I think the key is really to communicate, right? You can't really have a universal ban on an important part of a culture, but you can do a lot of things to communicate with the people. As I said, you can advocate, you can encourage, you can use. I think actually Beijing has been doing pretty well in communicating with the public, but this can be better.
All right, we're running out of time for this discussion. So when you go back home, your neighbors are setting off fireworks and firecrackers. What would you say to them, briefly?
Well, continue to celebrate, but then not that much noise. I mean, use the electronic ones.
Enjoy the new year.
Okay, thank you so much, Professor Qi, Professor Teng Jimeng. Thank you for joining us once again. Happy New Year to you and all your families. Thank you so much. And we'll be back after this. Welcome back. From fireworks over Beijing to the secrets of the universe. For our final segment, we take a look at two very different cosmic phenomena. These two figures are the most popular topics on social media in China today. This one, of course, is Taishen, or the Chinese god of wealth, going all the way back to the 17th century BC. During the Spring Festival or the Lunar New Year in China, Chinese families would hang a picture of him, seeking blessings of great luck and wealth. Now people put portraits of this imagined god onto their social media pages. The second figure we are talking about, of course, is the iconic scientist Albert Einstein. Decades ago, he theorized the existence of gravitational waves, ripples in space-time. Well, it's not a theory anymore. The SENT team at the LIGO Observatory have actually succeeded in detecting these almost imperceptible waves. The discovery could revolutionize our understanding of the black hole and could even allow scientists to learn more about the Big Bang and the creation of the universe. And that is only the beginning. It is reported that these are similar scientific projects undergoing in Japan, Italy, as well, and possibly in India in the near future. So at this moment, I'm really thinking, when we in China, for fun and fortune, are busy praying to Taishen, it could be even more worthwhile from now on, extending our ears and listening more closely to the exhilarating sounds of the cosmic waves, because the true source of innovation, that is where it comes. Of course, we'll be delving further into this exciting discovery on Monday's show. It promises to be an extremely interesting discussion. For now, if you'd like to see more of our program we've discussed on today's show, you can visit our website. Just type in World Insight CCTV News into your search engine. You'll be able to find us. Or you can also check out our YouTube channel. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone at the World Insight team, thanks for watching. And tune in again next time for more insights from across China and around the world. Good night and happy Chinese New Year.